Hey guys. Okay, let's see. I just need to grab my books. I forgot them on my floor. How's everybody doing? Bubba, you're in my way. Excuse me. Wow, what a feisty little Bubba tonight. Hey, books. Just need my pen. Are you guys ready to get down to business? Who's on here? Say hello in the YouTube chat. Okay. Oh, hey Sam. Excuse me. Okay. All right, let's see. Got my books. Let's try to get this over here. Okay. And then I think we need to move that camera. I have some chicken nuggets happening. Did I hold my phone the last time? I feel like that would have been weird if I did that for the whole time that we were on the chat. I have some chicken nuggets and french fries that the dog is like laying on top of right now because he really wants to eat them. But that's not going to happen. Okay. Ooh, Chinese takeout. Not bad. Not bad at all. Okay, let's see. You hear him? Okay. Hey, guys. How are you all doing? Bubba's going to join us tonight for the book club. Now are you hiding? Hello. Hi there. What's wrong? All right, so how many in here and in there have read the book or have read the chapters? The chapters that we talked about discussing tonight were, let's see. The first one was Hockey Mom, I think, right? Oh, what do I have on my face? Okay, so the first chapter I think was Hockey Mom, Stages of Haggling, and Extra Innings, right? That sounds right? That light is, I need to like move so I'm talking that light, right? So, I didn't get to read this time. Yeah, it totally will be okay because the questions and the discussion points that I have for tonight are super generic. And I think we'll have a lot of fun regardless because I like to have fun. And if we're not having fun, then what are we doing this for, right? Okay, so let's get into it. Well, first of all, how are you guys liking the book so far? Just like as a disclaimer, I don't have any like emotional connection to the book. I don't, meaning I don't have an emotional attachment to the book. I don't know the author. It wasn't recommended to me by anybody. I really have like no stake in it other than it sounded cool and let's just do this. So be totally honest. I'm sorry, guys. I'm having a hard time getting comfortable for some reason. Okay. Let's get this closer. I haven't read the book, so take it easy on me if I say something that's smart. That's not what it's about. You don't have to worry about being smart. You just have to worry about weighing in on whatever you think as it relates to the topic at hand. So what have you guys thought of the book so far? I think it's great. I love Karen Duffy's writing style. Have you read any of her other book? She has one other book, I think. I think it's, there are obviously things about the book so far that I think are relatable. And that I think, we can all sort of compare our own lives to as people that are living chronic illness or chronic pain or both. But I'm not like obsessed with it. I think if I wasn't doing this, I don't know if I'd keep reading. That's just being really honest. I'm committed to it, obviously, for the book club. But, she has a different writing style than what I'm used to for people who are writing about their lives in creative nonfiction, which is my favorite genre to read, creative nonfiction, people who write about experiences. And I'm used to like a little bit more humor than the way that she writes. I think she has like a dry sense of humor for sure, but it's like definitely not the same kind of humor that I'm totally on board with, I guess. I'm not mad about it. Okay, Martha Margot. It's all right. She has some good points, and I like learning about what she's talking about, but I feel like some parts it just wasn't compelling. I agree, actually, and maybe we'll get into that when we start talking about the different sections now. But I agree. That's what I was sort of saying a minute ago. Is like, if we weren't doing this, I don't know that I would have been able to keep reading it because I'm someone that really like I need my attention to be drawn in regularly. Like I need it to be the kind of book that I can't put down. Otherwise, I won't keep reading it. And I don't know that would have happened with this book if we had not decided to read it all together. So, but I do think that there's still some really cool stuff to talk about, and it's at the very least it gives us some discussion points and some things that we can sort of ponder as chronically ill people. So this one light back there is making me insane. I don't really know why. Hello. Okay, so let's get into it. So let's see, where did we start? Hockey Mom, right? Is there anything that stuck out to you guys? Feel free to weigh in. I'm just going to start getting into it like we did last time and start bringing up some that I thought were interesting, and, we can go from there. Okay, so let's see. Oh, so some people actually already brought this up in the last chat or messaged me about it. She discusses in the beginning of the chapter Hockey Mom on page 19. One of the first things she talks about is her idea of the difference between chronic illness and acute illness. Right? Is that it? Yeah. She had said, it took almost 2 years from a medical team to diagnose my condition as sarcoidosis of the central nervous system. During this phase, I went from acutely ill to chronically ill. The acute stage is the emergency, oh my God, am I going to die stage. And then she said, I developed a coping strategy, which a lot of you also messaged me about too. It was pretty interesting. She says, and we'll talk about this also, I developed a coping strategy to help me endure this time of diagnostic uncertainty, which is when she's like, it's the oh my God stage is like, I'm just diagnosed. I don't know what this means for me. I don't know what my life is going to look like moving forward, like all of that kind of stuff, where you're like really panicking. And she didn't really know how to deal with that. So she said that she would go to the corner deli to buy milk. She'd search the dairy case for the milk carton with the longest lead time. My goal was to stay above ground until the date milk soured, meaning survive. Stay above ground, meaning not dying. And she said for 2 years she lived her life from carton to carton. So basically hoping that before the milk expired, nothing worse would happen, or that she wouldn't end up like losing her battle with her disease. What do you guys, I'll talk about that first. What do you guys think about that? About sort of pinpointing a short-term goal to help you get to succeeding and getting past to the long-term goal, which is ultimately like getting over that hump of that acute stage, as she calls it. So Rebellious Story says that kind of sounds depressing. I tend to agree with that. I thought it was super depressing when she said that. But sort of going back to what I said a little while ago about what I feel about the book in general, it has like a little bit of a morbid flair to it. And in my life, I definitely joke and I definitely make light of situations, and use humor as sort of a vehicle to get from anxiety to calm, I guess, or a comfortable level of like sanity. But being morbid is not something that I think I'm comfortable with, and as using it as a coping mechanism. So I found that really jarring. And there's other parts in the book too where she refers to like being in the dirt, and I was like, oh, like that's a lot for me. Of course, like that's how she copes or coped back then and copes now in certain ways, but it was a lot for me. Rebellious Story says, I mean, it's just setting the bar so low. How about living every day just wanting to feel happy at the end? I feel like that's a lighter, short-term goal. I agree with that. I think that, I mean, I'm trying to put myself in that position. I guess because I also almost feel like if you set like such a low bar and you have such a milk, even on the longest date, what does it take? A week? I feel like I would have anxiety thinking all the time about like, okay, am I going to make it till the milk expires? Like I guess there was something about that for me that was also depressing. Because I feel like I don't know, it felt like a jinx almost. So then she goes on to say, when the immediate danger is past and you get into a swing of your new disease, that was my dog, you've matriculated into the chronic phase where you learn to live with and attempt to manage your serious, unpredictable illness. This is where I am now, and I've been here for a while. A lot has happened to me in this past decade and a half. Get off my french fries. The best thing was the arrival of my son, she says. Rebellious Story says, I got sick later in life, and there was a time where it was, I don't know when I'm going to die thing. But I feel like that sort of attitude would have made it much worse. My dog, she's screwing with the camera. I'm sorry, guys. Bubba, stop. I agree with setting small, short-term goals as a way to cope. Because big goals can make you wonder how on earth you can achieve those when you can barely get out of bed. I understand that, but like I think where I was lost a little bit in that analogy was that her goal was to just not die, and there was like no goal of like being content or being happy or being having anything like joyful or fulfilling happening in her life necessarily. She just was like, before the milk sours, I just want to still be alive, which again is very morbid. And so I think like for me, the way that I have succeeded with my chronic illness in my life has been to always be working towards something, and like the key word being working towards, meaning I need to feel in control. And so I feel like when she uses the analogy of saying, well, let's see what happens by the date the milk expires, there's no power there, there's no control there. You're just sort of like leaving it up to chance, and then hopefully by the time the milk goes bad, you're still here kicking it. So like for me, that wouldn't be my preference. The short-term thing I can understand, maybe it being something more along the lines of, every day I'm going to set my goal to be that I get out of bed and take a shower, or every day my goal is going to be that I eat, or like something still small but something that empowers you and you have control over. and that you can feel like you can feel proud of at the end of the day. I don't feel like there's any reward in giving that power away to just like a tangible, inanimate object, you know? Stronger Than Pots says, I haven't been reading the book, but decided to join in since I was home. I agree with it sounding super depressing. As a short-term survival goal, sure, whatever you have to do to survive, but I don't think it's a sustainable goal. I agree, because again, like I said, again, like you're giving the power to something other than you, and you can't tweak it, you can't work with it, you can't work around it, you can't make it work for you. It just sits there and it waits, and it seems daunting and it seems almost creepy, you know. Sam says, I do try to do the small goals right now, but I have some long-term goals, but they aren't as detailed as they were. Things like planning to finish school, but then daily and weekly. I work towards smaller things. I do sort of get what she's saying with the milk carton to milk carton. For the diagnosis I was given at 14 until the surgery I had at 16, I felt like a walking time bomb, so it was morbid. And then with the more recent health issues, initially it felt that maybe a year ago, but I also had some providers that were being fairly morbid. Malformation in her brain since age 14. That's kind of crazy. So you bring up a really good point, Sam, and I'll ask this to the rest of the group over here too. Do you guys feel like the people around you can also affect your approach or how you're viewing life, or how positive or negative or morbid or goal setting or whatever you are? Because what Sam said in the chat over here is that her doctors were being fairly morbid. And I think it's really important to discuss what that could potentially do to a patient. That's something that I've actually always been very conscious of. We've talked about it before. I'm someone who lives in Manhattan. I have access to a lot of healthcare that is like, you know, it, like I said in the last chat, it doesn't necessarily mean that the doctors are better. They just have access. They've just been exposed to many more different types of patients than someone who lives in the middle of nowhere. So I feel very fortunate for that, because the doctor that diagnosed me has also seen another case or two of patients who have my disease, and only one in I think it was 2 million people have been diagnosed with it. So that's pretty crazy odds, and he has seen other people with it, where I imagine in other areas that wouldn't have been the case. But my point is that with me feeling fortunate, I also have had the advantage of being able to meet a doctor and say, I don't like you, I'm going to go find another doctor, and I can go down the street and find someone who is just as good or better. Whereas I think some people, maybe even some of you, are limited to the region that you're living in. So if you don't necessarily like sort of how you're being treated, not that I advocate for you just sucking it up and dealing with it, because I really think everybody should do everything they can to not be in that situation. I think if you are in that situation, it could potentially screw with your mindset. Sam over here says, like provider suggesting I was going to die, similar to what I was told as a teenager. I had a geneticist adamant that I had certain things in addition to EDS. And the brain hemorrhage, epilepsy, type of vascular malformation I had was actually told as a child it could bleed catastrophically at any time. I mean, that's crazy. Think about it. She was 14 years old, and her doctor was basically like she said, you know, you're a ticking time bomb. You could be walking down the street and just like, boom, probably, you know, throw an aneurysm or have a seizure that could end it all. Mark Van Muggle over here says, but I do think just surviving, such as with the milk, can make you feel more desolate. But I do think just surviving, such as with the milk, can make you feel more desolate. What do you mean by that? Life is so much more than not dying. Yes. So that's exactly right. Well, and by right, I mean, you understand what I'm saying. I don't mean right or wrong. There's no right or wrong in this situation. And that's sort of the beauty of these discussions, is we can all come together and say, this is how I cope. This is how I cope. Wow, I never considered that. Maybe I'll try that. How I'm coping is not really working, or vice versa. Rebellious Story also says, what's the point of staying alive if there's nothing else you have to look forward to? You know, it's really funny. I'll finish the rest of your message in a second, your comments in a second. What's interesting, and I don't know if it relates to my chronic illness, or if it's just the type of person that I am, But I am the type of person who, for a very long time in my life, even still now a little bit, but not as much as when I was younger, I have consistently had an issue with being present. And that's really just been the default of me having a preference of looking at the future, meaning I like Friday. Friday is my favorite day of the week. And the reason why Friday is my favorite day of the week is because it's the closest day to the weekend without the weekend being over, which is crazy because you would think that Saturday would be the best day because you don't have to go to work. You're off all day. You can do whatever the hell you want. You don't have to be up early the next day. If for someone who is living in the present, Saturday should technically be the day that like everybody sort of aims for. But for me, it's Friday because as soon as Saturday happens, I start thinking about Sunday, and then my weekend might as well be shot. Because when it is Sunday, I'm like bummed out already. I totally screw my whole Sunday over, pissed off that tomorrow's Monday, even though it's not Monday. So, and it's the same thing with like planning vacations. I'm someone who historically, I've said on here, I'm super organized. I have to forward think because of my illness. I'm always planning everything. I'm a planner. I'm an organizer. I budget. Every possible way that you can like prepare your life for something to go wrong is as much as I possibly can. Within reason, I do to make myself feel prepared. But that probably trickles down into like this vacation planning thing where I love planning vacation, you know, um, figuring out, the days and the times and what we're going to do and the hotel and doing all the research and all that by the time I've worked myself up so much that by the time I get to the vacation, I already feel like, oh, it's almost over. Even if the vacation hasn't even really started yet, because I find it more exciting to be in the planning phase. Christmas Eve, more than Christmas, same thing. Christmas Eve is always like a day that I was really excited about, but Christmas Day, I always felt like, oh, well, it's all almost over. Chronically Coloring says, I think who I surround myself with makes a huge difference. Marfan Muggle says, for sure, we often become what we surround ourselves with, especially when you're at a very low point and might lose your sense of self. Sam says, I feel like learning to survive rather than just exist and then eventually thrive and not be miserable are also my goals. Sarah Stronger Than Pa says, I agree 100% with Sam. When I was bedridden, my mom was a huge source of hope. I was on a new Facebook support groups. I was on a few Facebook support groups that were lifesavers to me in many ways when learning about my new diagnosis. But they're morbid perspectives for life sucking. I'm still a member of the support groups, but had to unfollow, so it wasn't in my newsfeed all the time. That's really interesting. You know what I find also interesting? I'm not really active on Facebook. I don't like it. I'm like one of those oldies where I was a sophomore in college when Facebook was created, and what it is now is so different than what it was when it first came out that I feel like an old lady. I don't really know how to navigate through it. I think they have too much access into what I'm doing. I get notifications every day about people that I don't really care about. So like I'm like pretty reserved on Facebook. But I've been invited to a few different groups on Facebook based off of people who have met me here, and then also people that I've connected with whose kids who are like under 5 years old in different countries who have my disease, so I can help them navigate through it in a way that nobody could help my parents. And what I feel, which I don't understand, is that it seems like on Facebook, people behave more in a way that makes sense to me than people on Instagram. And I don't know if you guys have experienced that or if you even understand what I'm saying or what you have experienced, but it just seems like people on Facebook are more down to earth and aren't really as attention seeking, and like it's not about like, look at me. It's like, hey, this is, I'm going to the doctor tomorrow. Does anybody have advice? Like more practical kind of conversations. Chronically Coloring says, I think who I surround myself with makes a huge difference. Sarah says, I have such a hard time being present too. I made a post about this exact thing today. Sorry, I wish I had seen it. I'll check it out after this. I think it's a coping mechanism to be future oriented, especially when the present might be painfully physically. That actually makes sense, because if you're unhappy in the moment or you're in physical pain in the moment, looking forward to something better could potentially help you get through whatever you're dealing right now, right? Rebellious Story says, I have found that people on Facebook tend to be more depressive in their posts sometimes. People on IG are far more attention seeking. That's interesting. I can see that though, I guess. Yeah, well, it's funny though, because what I was going to say was I noticed this today. I'm in a group that I think I'm going to get out of. Someone on here connected with me the other day. Like, the group doesn't make sense for what my condition is, and I don't feel connected to it. But every once in a while, in the other groups that I'm in, or even in this group, there are people that will like go on there and post and be like, "Hey guys, sorry, I'm just gonna rant," and then they say like some ranty thing, and it's funny because like on Instagram, I feel like posts like that get like a shit ton of like, you'll be okay, girl, and like gentle hugs and like all that stuff, and like keep it up, and you're beautiful, and like all this like encouraging like fake stuff. And then on Facebook, all you see is like seen by 37. Like, people don't weigh in, which makes me feel like maybe people look at stuff like that on Facebook the same way that I do, which is like, all right, well, do you really need to do that? Like, you're in a group of people that you really don't know. Do you have a friend? Do you have a dog? Do you have a mirror? Like, I always feel like it's really weird when somebody vents, or like, is like so super vulnerable to the point where it's like they're confiding in people that they've never communicated with on a regular basis or don't know in real life. I always think that's super strange. Sam says, I don't use Facebook as much anymore, and while sometimes that seems to be the case, there are definitely groups I used to be in that are very negative and toxic. There are rules for groups there, though, so I guess it varies. Huh. Marfan Muggle says, Sarah put into words what I feel but can't explain about focusing on the present. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, I think. Always like sort of working towards something, being excited about something because whatever is happening in this moment isn't that exciting. So, one of the other things I noticed that really resonated with me, and I don't know if she even meant it exactly the same way that I sort of interpreted it, but on on page 21, she says that she has to. I'm trying to find where she says it. Right. Oh, here we go. She says the minutiae of daily life are more taxing when you have the stress of a chronic condition, and I often need to regulate my pain medication around his hockey schedule. His meaning her son. And I thought that was really interesting because I think a lot about my life and like how every day, depending on like the time of day it is or what I have going on, I like definitely plan out taking certain medications around the things that I prioritize. Like, for example, when I work out with my personal trainer, I make sure that I'm at a comfortable enough level to be able to work out with my personal trainer. Whereas, but I have to time it out right. And what's kind of annoying about that for me is I've been working out with him for like 4 years, and he really understands my autoimmune disease. Because I've been friends with him so long now, and he's met my doctors. He's taken the time to really understand um, how my condition affects me and how we can work my workouts around that. But he can be a flake, and he lives like a little over an hour away. And so he gets stuck in traffic a lot, or he like doesn't plan out his time properly, so he gets here late pretty often. But then, of course, like if I wait to take certain medications, he'll show up on time, and then it'll cut into my time if I have to wait for a medication to kick in. So I'm always trying to like time that out right, and it like almost never works out in my favor, because of like how inconsistent he is with getting here on time. But it's not something I think that he really understands. So I mean, he says he does, but it doesn't really prevent him. It doesn't really help him or promote him trying harder to be here on time. It feels like or seems like. Is that something that you guys experience, that you feel like you have to wait for certain in the morning for certain medications to kick in, or even the other way around? Are there certain medications that like don't make you feel so good, so you have to time it out where you take them like after you do what you want, whatever social thing you want to do or whatever? Rebellious Story says, I definitely try to be prudent and take rescue meds early, but I don't plan them around people because people are flaky. Sam says, I know there are some I definitely avoid or schedule around interactions. Rebellious Story says, sometimes this screws me though because I'll take a drowsy medication and then I have to socialize. Yeah, I totally understand that. And like you said, people are flaky, and which is kind of ironic because I think a lot of people who are chronically ill get a bad rap for being flakes. And then we have to, like, I get a little cranky if I like have to time out something properly and it doesn't quite jive, and then I like don't feel great because of it. I'm like irritated with the people around me, even if it's not their fault. Rebellious Story says people are flaky, but unfortunately my chronic illness is not. So I just go with the consistent one. um, let's see. On page 26, she says she's talking about her son. And she says, I want him to figure out how to avoid disappointment and frustration on his own. So she was talking about how she doesn't really like to coddle her son. Let me see what the exact quote says because I think there's a little bit more before that. She said she wants her son to have his own experiences away from her prying eyes. I don't sit in the rink and watch every practice and game. I want him to figure out ways to deal with frustrations and disappointments on his own. I don't see how I'm being useful if I'm all over him like moles on grandma. He's learning independence and the important skill of being able to tell a great story from his own point of view. So, what do you guys think of that? Do you think that I'm curious? What I'm curious about when she says that is if you think that that's what her personality is, or if you think that's the way that her chronic illness made her. Because as somebody who is chronically ill, I have lived my life in a way that I feel like is constantly trying to accomplish things and sort of show people around me that I'm able to do X, Y, and Z. And it has made me super independent, and to a fault probably. Like just very super independent and very self-sufficient. And I wondered when she says all of that if she's treating her son the way that she's treating him because she values independence in a way that maybe other moms don't in that circumstance. So, like, don't step on the computer. Some parents, Sarah Beth says, some people who are chronically ill have parents who are like helicopter parents. Some people who are chronically ill have parents who are like give me more. Tell me more about what you mean by that. Sam says, I mean, I didn't read this far yet, but with her illness, would that also limit how much she could do the things she's describing? So she choosing not to may feel better. Interesting. So maybe she's like, you're saying she's like sort of spinning off of the idea that she can't do as much physically anyway. So she's like taking a positive spin on it, saying, I don't helicopter my kid. I don't, coddle him or whatever. I'm not all over him. I let him do whatever he needs to do, and then he can find his independence, which is code for I can't do that much anyway, so we're going to find the silver lining, like that. Mark Van Muggle says, not that there's anything wrong with her approach, though. She doesn't need to be apologetic for doing what she thinks is best for his development. Rebellious Story says, maybe it's a bit of both. Her personality is partially like that, and her chronic illness gives her the excuse not to go, therefore feeding that open. I actually didn't disagree with her parenting style at all. I think that's awesome that she lets him sort of, it's like sort of the idea that like you let your kid fall a couple times and get scrapes and bruises to like toughen them up a little bit, or like what is it when like I don't really know much about kids because I don't have any, but when when like you're trying to like sleep train your baby or whatever it is, and then you put your kid to sleep, your little newborn or whatever, and because like you're so used to like going in there every 5 minutes every time the baby cries, so you try to sleep train them so when they start crying you let them cry it out so they can figure out how to console themselves, like that kind of a mentality. So Sarah, so in this scenario, the mother is the one that's sick. The kid isn't sick. More than a spoon, he says, parenting with a chronic illness scares me. I feel like it would be so impossible because I can't even look after myself. Do you have kids? Sarah says you have to allow your children to make mistakes so they can learn and overcome, just my opinion. Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. That's probably it. Chronically Coloring says, my mom has held me back before when worries. I was on a trip by myself to visit my aunt and we went kayaking. My mom on the phone was all, make sure you don't overdo it. My aunt was like, she's 27. I like that. I agree. My mom has, well, I think my mom is mentally ill, so there's some things there with her that I think contribute to her behaviors, like being obsessive, compulsive, and anxious and depressed. But she's also a nurse, and so I think like she worried to a degree that that was for me when I was still growing up in a way damaging because I was not allowed to go and like hang out with friends or whatever. Really, like I was very I don't want to say sheltered because like I was allowed to like I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to say.
I wasn't sheltered in that like things were hidden from me. I was exposed to like normal like adult things, but I just was like very restricted in what my brother and I we were allowed to do. We weren't allowed to like go run around the neighborhood with friends or anything like that. Everything had to be in like a controlled circumstance. Chronically Calm says my parents definitely help and hinder my independence. Well, it's funny because like I was saying, I think my mother hurt my independence to a degree, but because I was aware of it and because I didn't want to like be living at home for the rest of my life, um, I used that to motivate me to become extremely independent, kind of as like a screw you, I can do this. You know, if you don't think I can do this, then watch me do this, and I'm going to do it better than you ever imagined I could. So it helped me in a way, in a backwards way. Hey, get off the computer. Lay down. Sarah says, my parents have hindered me from doing things and being independent, but it's hard for me to be upset because I don't have children and not sure how I'd be in the situation. Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I think that's a very diplomatic way of looking at it. You're very kind to be so considerate of the reason why your parents behave the way that they do or whatever. But I think you can so something that I've learned in the recent year last year is that you don't feelings aren't mutually exclusive. You can feel two things at once. So you can feel that your parents have hindered you, and that you don't really know. It doesn't mean that you don't respect them or that you don't care about what they what their intention is. But obviously you could still um, but you could still be upset by it. That's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't necessarily mean like I'm upset and I'm pissed off at them and I'm not going to have a relationship with them. But you can, like I said, the two feelings or ideas aren't mutually exclusive. You can be understanding of why they did it, but still be upset that it happened. Sam says I can relate to the backwards becoming independent because of the things I was told, etc. Yeah, same. More than a spoon, says I think it's common for most parents, to be honest, they never want to just let go. It means they love us. I don't know about all that. No, just kidding. Sarah Beth says, I feel like being sick, the only girl and youngest child, I was doomed for them not being protective. Let's see, who else? What this one says, what is Blau syndrome and how does it affect you? Well, that's a tangent. Blau syndrome is an autoimmune disease. It's inflammatory, so I have inflammation like all over my body. I have arthritis in every joint in my body, so that's mostly how it affects me as a joint disease because it limits my mobility and ability to walk. And when I'm really not feeling well, it affects my breathing, it affects my vision. But most of the time, like walking and like doing anything with physical exertion is difficult. Standing for more than a few minutes at a time becomes very difficult for me. I can't walk more than like a block or two at a time without being in a lot of pain. Um, so that's basically how it manifests itself. Chronically Coloring says, my parents are my world. Would I like to be more financially independent? Yes, but I'm so grateful for what they can provide for me and I can live on my own. That's great. I'm super jealous. My parents, I've been completely financially independent since a very young age. Fortunately and unfortunately. Fortunately because I could say I did this, but unfortunately because it's very difficult. Chronically Coloring says, I realize my privilege is this statement. I was waiting for someone to call you out on that actually, because people in the chronically ill community love to call people privileged. No problem. I just graduated from grad school, so now it's real life. Yeah, I'm still paying off my graduate school debts from 9 years ago. Let's see what else we have here. Seven. Oh, she was talking about. She says hockey gives her son a chance. I never say his name because it's strange. She says hockey gives her son a chance to prove to himself that he can do it. Hockey gives her son a chance to prove to himself that he can do it. In hockey, there is a penalty for what's called embellishment. I thought this was really interesting, actually, this embellishment thing. She says it's when a player overreacts to an injury during a play. So, like, if somebody gets tackled or something like that, and they're really okay, but they're like, "Oh, I'm tackled, I'm hurt, whatever," right? And then it says the embellishment penalty is a way to call out a faker. My son teases me when I'm having a pain episode. He imitates my expression on my face and broken bobblehead, hunched over posture in order to make me laugh. He has threatened to give me an embellishment penalty if I don't shake it off. It is a reminder to not wallow, that life is going to give you some hits and that you have to get up and keep going. I can't call a timeout on being his mom. If he can stand in front of the goal and face a barrage of 90-mile-per-hour slap shots, I can find a way to suck it up and get him to the rink. It's tough to live as a person with chronic illness, but you know who else? It's tough. Hockey players. And I wanted to know what you guys thought of that. I thought that the comparison was pretty interesting, because wouldn't it be funny if, well, yeah, she mentioned somewhere in the book that, like, he's the greatest thing that ever happened to her, I think. Where do I want to go with this? So I think it's interesting because I like the whole concept, and as it relates to the chronically ill community online, because it seems like a lot of people over exaggerate. A lot of people are attention seeking. A lot of people are claiming they have conditions that they don't actually have. Wouldn't it be funny if it were just that easy to be like, you get an embellishment penalty if you see an account that's like totally abusing whatever, they're not being forthcoming, or they're, deceiving people on purpose, or they're trying to get your money or whatever they're doing. I thought that was pretty interesting. Let's see. More Than a Spoon says, I find that difficult because we are accused of being fakers so much. So I don't ever have that experience. I'm never accused of being a faker. So I have a really difficult time when people say things like that. And that's me personally, in my experience, and being sick since birth. So I always think it's weird when people say that they're accused of being fakers. And I have a theory about that is not specific to you. But my theory about that, which I've explained on my Instagram page, is if you have people around you that are, or that aren't supportive, or that are questioning your illness, then they don't, then you don't need them in your life. But if everybody around you in your life is questioning whether or not you're sick, maybe the problem is you. So, and when I say maybe the problem is you, I don't necessarily mean you're not sick. I mean you are doing something or behaving in a way that's letting other people around you believe that there's something happening that is deceiving. Because you're the common denominator. And if it's happening frequently, then even more so why I feel that way. Hi, Alexandria. Chronically Coloring says, one time before I was sick, I was at camp and wanted to get out of inspection. I faked that I felt sick to get out of chores and ended up having 103 fever. That was instant karma. Chronically Coloring says the people who have a 10 episode once a week. Yeah, sounds about right. Let's see. Yeah, Starbucks says we could throw embellishment penalties all over social media. Yeah, sort of like Oprah, right? And you get an embellishment penalty, and you get an embellishment penalty. More than a Spoonie says, ooh, ooh, ooh. But we are accused so much of being fake. If that was in real life, as Miss would get it all the time, but we suffer 24/7. Let me go back to that. Hi, Raylan. Yeah, I definitely understand that. I don't get it so much. Only at school by stupid kids you don't understand. How old are you? But as a what? Patient leader? I see it all the time with mentioning for real social media is so fake. What I was you're 16, okay. So what I was going to say, and what's your? Do you mind if I ask what your diagnosis is? I forget. What I was going to say though, the one thing that I didn't really like, or I didn't really like that chapter. I'm not a hockey fan. I can appreciate an analogy. I can appreciate maybe even like a short little story, but an entire chapter where you're comparing your illness to hockey was like too much for me. It wasn't something that resonated with me. You know, I feel like a couple of the analogies that were made could have been expressed in a way that I didn't need to read a whole chapter about hockey. And also, because of the connection that she has with her son, which is awesome, obviously, and really special, and her love for hockey, she's giving hockey players a level of credit that I don't think is the same level of credit that people who are chronically ill should be given. And I'm someone who is like the furthest from feeling entitled or like attention seeking or like separates myself from a non-chronically ill population. It's something that I'm very assimilated into, everyday life. But when she says, "But you know who else is top hockey players?" Hockey players can take the pads off and go home at night. I think like to me that seemed like a really big stretch, and I was almost offended by it. Which is weird because she's chronically ill, so I'm not sure why that didn't speak to her also. But I almost wonder, like I said, if it's because she's a little biased because of her interest in the sport and the interest in her son, which is fine. That's reasonable. Oh, okay. Neuromyelitis optica. Got it. Chronically Coloring says, I was lucky that I had an illness that shows up in blood work, etc. I had visible ulcers, so there was no denying it. So maybe I was lucky in that way. This is Backbone by Karen Duffy. That's the book that we've been reading for the past few weeks. Yeah, I don't think she meant anything by it. Like, I don't think she was like trying to be snarky or anything. But I do think that it was a little, for me, it felt like kind of a careless way to compare. Let's see. and then we're done with the hockey chapter, which is fine with me. The next chapter was stages of haggling. Oh, she said the first thing she says in this chapter, as my doctor once said, we are all temporarily able-bodied. What do you think she or her doctor means by that? Welcome, my sick fit life. The question that I just asked was on, we just finished the chapter Hockey Mom. Hey, back up. We just finished the section Hockey Mom, and we're talking about the question that I just asked was, she says in the beginning of the chapter, Stages of Haggling, as my doctor once said, we are all temporarily able-bodied. And I wanted to know what you guys thought she or her doctor meant by that, or what she perceived her doctor meant by that. I think this is, whatever. Because I had some thoughts on that and I wasn't really sure. I thought it was a weird way to start the chapter. I understand where she was going, because she was talking then about like people with missing legs and arms and like all this other stuff. But I wasn't really sure. I was curious about what you guys perceived that to mean. More than Spoon says that when you get old, you're disabled. As a baby, you're disabled. Disability is seen as the inability to efficiently do a task. I'm confused. We are all temporarily able-bodied. Oh, so what you're saying is that there's only like a period of life where we can actually function at an optimal level, is what you mean by that? Like, Marfan Muggle says, I think he was talking about the loss that comes with her illness, so she had good times to compare to her current state too. But some people are born with disabilities, so I don't know if that applies. Actually, so you just brought up a point that helps me make the point that I keep making on my account. There are a few phrases that I think are overused in the chronically ill community online, that I think people blindly repurpose and don't really think about what they actually mean or how they could mean to them or how they apply to them. And one of those phrases is able-bodied. And I get really irritated when I see someone comparing themselves to the able-bodied, because disabled doesn't mean completely without ability. And I think by all of the things that I see people doing on here that are really great, productive, and accomplishments that are happening, it's very clear that there are very few people that are unable to do anything at all. So I think that, so my preference is that I don't use that phrase. My chat's about to restart in 5 seconds, so come back on. It's going to restart without me. I don't get to restart it. Sorry, just waiting for Instagram to restart. Do. Sorry about that. Welcome back. It's irritating. Instagram turns it off after an hour, and then I have to come back on, which is frustrating. But so basically, what I was saying was, I think it's frustrating for me because I see a lot of people who are comparing chronically ill to X, chronically ill to able-bodied, which by default implies that we are not able-bodied, which is not completely true. We are limitedly able-bodied. we we are maybe compromised bodied, but we're not completely without ability. And just like someone with the flu, right? If like a lot of us compare our illnesses to having the flu all the time, meaning like we're achy, it's painful, we're tired all the time, we might have nausea, headaches, all that kind of stuff. But people with the flu, I had a coworker with the flu that went to work recently, and it like really confused me because I'm chronically ill and I have a weakened immune system, and I was like, this is like really scary. But she came to work, so if we're comparing ourselves to people who get the flu and then they still are functioning enough to go to work, or they're still functioning enough to go to the bathroom or take a shower or cook themselves some soup or whatever it is, that doesn't mean that they're disabled, right? It means that they're temporarily, temporarily slowed down. More than a spoon, he says. Itch. I think disability is different to chronic illness in this sense. We have a day-to-day spectrum, but disabled people from car crash or injury are just all the time able. All the time disabled. Day-to-day spectrum, but disabled people from car crash or injury are just all the time disabled. Sorry, I'm just trying to process what you said. I think I agree with you. I'm just trying to figure out what that means to me. Yes, so basically, like, well, I consider myself physically disabled all the time because I am. Meaning, I have permanent physical disabilities. But that doesn't mean that every part of my body is not able to function. And like you said, I function at different levels depending on the day or how much medication I have in me or how I'm feeling or things like that. But I think that, like I said, when we're saying we're calling people who are not chronically ill able-bodied, I don't think that's even really fair because there are people who are not chronically ill who have other physical ailments or that are, even if they're temporary or they have, other limiting factors that make them less able. So that whole conversation is really confusing to me. And there's other phrases when like chronically ill call the non-chronically ill lucky, which implies that we're unlucky, which I don't agree with either. I think that there have been unlucky things and unlucky circumstances in my life. Being chronically ill is obviously one of them, but I've also been very lucky with my illness. Like I could be much worse off. I've been much sicker than I am in this moment. I'm relatively well managed medically. So all things considered, I am lucky. So I don't think the good things that have happened in my life make me are because I have luck. I think I've worked for them, but I also think that the circumstances that I don't completely control, I've been very lucky with, if that makes sense. So when she says in the book, I put down, when she says in the book, as my doctor once said, we are all temporarily able-bodied. I was interested by that because it's a phrase that I just don't like, and it doesn't speak to me, and I don't think it's a positive way to represent ourselves by comparing ourselves to people who have a positive attribute, which sort of indirectly implies that we have a negative attribute. Mm. So one of the next things that came up was like there was a lot of talk about service dogs. She basically she talks about service dogs a lot. She explains the difference between like an emotional support dog, like a medical. What did she say? There's different kinds. Service animals, therapy animals, and emotional support animals. So she talks about the differences. Um, and I was curious to see if you guys thought that this was becoming a trendy topic, because it seems that way to me. I feel like every other account that I stumble on right now is either an account with someone who's chronically ill who's training his or her dog, or it's an account about the dog. And I think that animals, or in this case dogs, can be good emotional support for sure, but that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing like more true service animals. But like the stuff that I'm seeing these dogs being trained to do seems arbitrary some of the time. Like alerting someone when they're about to pass out, that's one thing, or when their sugar's about to drop, that's one thing. But or they or a seeing eye dog. I mean, really, in the most traditional sense of a service dog, right? Back in the day, a service dog meant that someone was blind. And now all of a sudden, service dogs are for, like I said, notifying you when like a critical clinical event is about to happen, which makes sense. And then they're also being trained to do other things like pick socks up off the floor and change the channel on the remote. And for people that are using their hands to teach them how to do these things. So it almost is becoming, in my opinion, like the question of, is this necessary or is this a novelty? Like everything else, right? Like we use our cell phones for everything. We have access to things that we don't need access to. People have access to us 24 hours a day and they don't need to. I feel like, oh my gosh, this is going to be my communication rant of the night. With my degrees in communication studies, it's a huge pet peeve of mine, and I think we've really gone in a direction where we can't differentiate between quality communication and communication just to pass the time, which really, in my opinion, isn't even so much communication. It's because people aren't saying things that matter. People aren't doing things that matter. People aren't listening. You know, when you're laying in bed at night and you're binge watching a TV show and you're bored, because I live alone, so I do that all the time. I text someone and I'm like, hey, what's going on? How's it going? Like, I don't need to talk to the same person every single day, all day long. And it could be somebody that I haven't seen in 3 years, but I still talk to them every single day in a text. But why? It's really I think like also, man, I need to go back to school to get a PhD, but so I could do some more studies on this. But I also think it contributes to why like marriages and relationships aren't working out in a lot of ways, because there's so much unnecessary communication that's happening during the day that when like husbands and wives are getting home at night from whatever they did during the day, like work, let's say work, they're getting home at night and there's no more like, how was your day? Because you texted each other all day. So like there's no element of mystery and there's no element of like I miss you and like the phrase like distance makes the heart grow fonder. There's no distance. There's no fonder. Let me back up and see what y'all are saying. More than a spoonie. What is your real name? Because I feel bad calling you more than a spoonie. I've been learning about that, how disability doesn't mean it's bad, and how the language we use affects the way we and others are viewed. Yeah, so that's 100% true, and that's something that I've also been trying to work on my account is helping people understand that it's not a bad thing because I think we're programmed to think that by default, and then we're also programmed to feel that because of like sort of what society tells us, and it's funny because I think the chronically ill community is inadvertently perpetuating that idea. And the way that they're doing that is by saying phrases like, sorry to need my hands. They are saying phrases like, I'm not defined by my illness because people don't want to be defined by something, by being sick. But I know that I'm totally defined by my illness, which means just about everything in my life is because I'm sick. Meaning, I work in healthcare and I'm good at it because I understand how to connect with patients and I really care about making sure that cancer patients get the experience that they should get because I've had negative experiences as a patient. That matters to me. I'm motivated and I persevere and I'm determined and I'm feisty and I can speak up and advocate for myself and for people important around me because I've had to do that with my illness. I'm independent because I wanted to prove to other people that I could be independent. All of these things are, in my opinion, as a result of being chronically ill. So I feel very defined by my illness, and that for me has been a very positive thing. And I think it's interesting because the other hypothesis that I have about that is everybody's or suggestion, I should say. Everybody's like so upset all the time saying, don't define me by my illness. But then you go on everybody's Instagram pages and they're like, I went to the doctor today. I got my blood drawn today. I'm sick today. I'm sick today. I'm sick today. Look at this new bog mask. Look at this new medical device. I'm sick today. I got more blood drawn. I'm at my whatever. I took pills today. So it's like this weird contradiction because it's like they're saying I don't want to be identified with or by, and I don't want to be defined by sickness. But then their whole life looks like sickness, and because they've done such a good job of making it sound like being defined by illness is a bad thing, it sort of makes them look like they're living their lives in a negative way because they're representing exactly what they're saying is the negative part. So it's like this sort of weird double-edged sword, this catch-22 that doesn't quite make sense. Deb says, I got my dog as an emotional support dog by what she's learned on her own, because the only way to get a true service dog, they have to be from a specific breeder. Well, I don't think it's about the breeder, Deb, as much as it's about them going to actual service dog training. Like certified as service dogs to do whatever the tasks are. Marfan Mago says, I think that mobility dogs can definitely be helpful and improve quality of life for people with certain disabilities. I believe it shouldn't be a first option. There should be multiple options. Oh, hi, Neve. Deb says, I've been married for 18 years and I don't text all day, so there is that hi, how are you happens if they want it to be. Oh, so what you're saying is people can choose not to communicate all day with their spouses if they want. Mark Van Munkle says exhausted first. Oh, she said there should be multiple options exhausted first because a dog is a big responsibility and won't solve everything. I agree. No, I don't think being chronically ill is a bad thing at all. I mean, it's unfortunate sometimes, but there's nothing negative about. We didn't choose it, right? Even though that's a very cliche thing to say, but in this context, I don't really, it doesn't bother me. We didn't choose it, so how can it be a negative thing? We can't change it, so how can it be a negative thing? It's like it's not a character flaw. So my spin on it is I am defined by my illness, or defined by in spite of and because of my illness is what I say all the time. A lot of people in the chronically ill community like to say, what have you done in spite of illness? What have you accomplished? And I like to say, what have I done in spite of and because of my illness? Because a lot of positive things in my life are because I'm a sick person. Deb says, my illness is a part of me, but not to that degree. It's how much do they really want to share, only the bad, or how turn good to good. There's no service dog training in Oregon. Yeah, a lot of states don't have, a lot of areas, I should say, don't necessarily have it, and you have to like send your dog to some kind of training camp in different areas. Streams are really like one of these. What you're doing is important. It's important to show alternative views. Thank you for joining our chat. That's really awesome. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, I didn't see your message over here. Sam says, I see it come up a lot, but I do know that before I even knew this community, it was suggested procedures. But more recently, it's been discussed again and support by both my therapist and medical, but it's something I would never try to solely train myself. That makes sense. I do see a lot of that actually, where I don't know how much of it is. Oh, I don't know how much of it is realistic or actual, training from people that know what they're doing. I see a lot of people posting videos like I'm in the store training my dog to do whatever, and I wonder like, is this the proper way to do it? And I'm not challenging from a perspective of like, I know better because I don't know anything about training a service dog, but I am curious about like if people need to take a class, or if they're just watching YouTube videos, or if they're sending the dog for actual training. Like I'm always curious about like what that process really is. Sam says, I think I've tried to say I'm more than just my illness, but my life experiences and illnesses since early childhood have shaped everything about me in some ways. I think rather than saying I don't want to be defined by it, maybe I want to be identified by more than just stereotypical sick things. Right. So the way that I combat that is by changing the stereotype. And for me, that has like the stereotype, I think, for people who are chronically ill, well, at least online, not in real life. People that I meet that are chronically ill in real life always behave much more similarly to me than what I experience seeing on the internet, unfortunately. But I think stereotypically sick people or chronically ill people are lazy, or they're a drain on society, or they just live off of disability, or they don't work. All those things. I'm none of those things. I mean, I am fortunate enough to be none of those things. There are people who do depend on disability and can't work and so on and so forth, but there are also people who can, or who have the financial means and still utilize or abuse certain opportunities that other people don't have access to. So I try to be as accountable as I can. That's my way of sort of navigating through that situation. The responsibility piece is actually why the service dog is almost a goal in my treatment to be healthy enough to have one since I live alone. I was originally pre-med, which was further influenced by my neurosurgeon as a teen. And then I switched to nursing after personal experiences, only to shift again just before I withdrew when I knew I couldn't stand up for shifts. So definitely because of. I mean, when I was in high school, the stereotypes for being sick was being the kid that had to stay with the teachers on trips and has special accommodations, etc., which is isolating. Yeah, I could see that. I know for like field days and sports days and stuff when I was a kid, I wasn't able to like participate the same way. I always had to stay back, sit out, whatever. So I could totally relate to that. I am actually going to hop off. I think that's a good place to stop for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for reading the book with me and joining these chats and weighing in and participating and engaging and being so open about the things that affect you and your chronic illness. I think it's important to have these conversations because I think the more that we sort of break them open and understand what we're thinking or why we're thinking it, it becomes a lot easier for us to push forward. So thank you. And I might hop on again and do this before next Friday just to rehash some things. But as always, I'll be here Friday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Feel free to send me a direct message if you have any questions about the book or anything we discussed tonight. Otherwise, good night.